All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining the Controller's Corner webinar for budgeting and forecasting challenges and best practices. Today's agenda, I'll give a little bit of an introduction on myself, and then we'll be going through some budgeting and forecasting challenges and talk about some relevant best practices in relation to those challenges. And then we'll go through a demo of an actual solution where it demonstrates some of those best practices. And for those who may have questions, please feel free to input your questions into the GoToWebinar chat box and or questions box, and I'll make sure to answer those at the end of the webinar. Thank you. So an introduction of myself, I am the Manager of Corporate Performance Management and Business Intelligence Division at Corporate Renaissance Group. My background is I've had advisory and implementation expertise in public and private sector across all industries, including manufacturing, tech, services, distribution, beverage, healthcare, insurance, utilities, and expands across Canada, the U.S., and the Caribbean. So with budgeting and forecasting, there's many challenges that organizations face. As we know, budgeting and forecasting is a critical part of the corporate performance management process. We find that many organizations face a lot of difficulty with the budgeting and forecasting process, and many organizations want to drive more value out of that process. So today we're going to look at some of those challenges that organizations are facing, and we'll look at some related best practices. The first challenge, and this may or may not be a surprise for some of the attendees and organizations that are on this webinar, but we find that many users, and by users I mean the budget contributors, have unclear understanding of the budget cycle in terms of the requirements, milestones, and deadlines. So we find that most organizations that we work with, a part of it is more of a process issue as opposed to a, let's say, a technology issue. And a key piece here is establishing a clear and consistent communication plan. So communications go out to the organization in terms of what are the key milestones and deadlines, what are the requirements, and maybe even some key assumptions that should be considered. So we find that many organizations, they reach that sort of mature step where they will distribute these communication touch points to the organization so everyone's on the same page in terms of what the requirements are, what the milestones are, and any key assumptions that they may need to be aware of. Another piece would say be on the technology side. So on the technology side, it's being able to actually implement a clear and transparent workflow. So this is a clear idea in terms of what are the steps in the budget cycle. So what's required from you, and also what are the key milestones and deadlines. So if you're able to actually show that, say, as a part of your budget model, it sort of puts more context in terms of what's required from the individual and all the pieces that go into the actual budget cycle. Another challenge is that many organizations find the budget process very labor-intensive as far as administering budget workbooks. So many organizations are working in Excel and being able to compile all these workbooks at the beginning of the budget cycle in terms of getting all the templates set up, and then sending out these budget workbooks to all of their end users, and then folks have to input the data, and then they have to collect it, or if, say, revisions or updates that need to be made to the workbooks in terms of like new accounts or new departments, it just can be a very labor-intensive process. So we find that as a best practice, most organizations are looking towards sort of a structured, automated solution for this. And most of these budgeting solutions that are out there on the market allow for the creation of structured templates. And when you create that structured template in terms of, say, this is the template that folks are going to be used to input their operating expense budget. This is the template that folks are going to be used that they're going to use for inputting their revenue budgets. And it's really a one-time build. And then the idea is that once you create the template, you create it once, all of the budget contributors can then access that same template. And so these templates are used to capture the budget data. And when they input their budget data into these templates, it automatically gets written to a database and it's automatically aggregated. So as opposed to having then to collect all of these individual templates and pull it together, folks are actually going through an interface, inputting their budget data, and it's actively being captured. Another key piece about these budget templates that you're able to create in these budgeting solutions is that they're multidimensional. And so it allows you to just, say, create one template for, say, for operating expenses, for example, as opposed to saying having to create one template for Department 1, another template for Department 2, another template for Department 3, another template for Department 4, and then distribute them out by email. What's great about these platforms is when you leverage them is that you create the template once, and essentially through filters and security, individuals can access that exact same template, and it controls the user access and also in terms of how the data is being stored, so say by division, department, and account. So it's a very, definitely a very efficiency driving process in terms of not having to go through the creation of these templates every year when you hit the budget cycle. Another key challenge that we see some organizations face is access challenges, as far as actually completing the budget. So folks are on the road, maybe they're in the office, they're maybe visiting customers, they may be at conferences, even just general demands. They might not be able to get to what they, in terms of preparing their budget, what they need to do, they might not be able to get during the day, and then maybe when they go home, they don't have maybe secure access to be able to maybe access the network to put some budget information. So there's all sorts of challenges that folks get into, and then as we're approaching the deadline, no one submitted their budgets. There's all sorts of, there are all sorts of excuses, so to speak, that sort of arise during that budget cycle in terms of why folks aren't able to input their budget data and get it completed. So the idea is that as a best practice, we want to make it easy for folks to be able to access the budget in terms of being able to access a template and be able to input that information on time. So there's a variety of different ways from a best practice perspective in terms of how we can get folks to get into the budget model and input their budget data. So one very common one is if it's a budget solution, so say a budget software, there's usually installs on a client workstation. So if you're in that environment where in the organization we have client installs on certain machines and folks can open the application and input budget data. So that's one. Another approach, and it's commonly used, is web access, so browser-based. So it means you just open up your web browser, you log into your portal, and then you're into the budget model. So nothing's installed on your machine; it's all done through your browser. And so no matter where you are, as long as you have an internet connection, you can access your budget model and input your budget data. So what if you have situations where you might not have an internet connection? So for example, maybe you're traveling, maybe you're on the plane, or maybe you're somewhere remote, like at a cottage, and you might not have internet access, but you need to maybe update or complete your budget. So some applications have Excel integration. So the idea here is that the budget solution can integrate with Excel. So what this allows for is you can download, say, one of those templates into Excel, and allows for offline viewing, and if may also allow for offline data collection. And so, for example, you can put data into that Excel template if you don't have access to the web, and then once you regain access to internet connection, you can reconnect to your network or to your database, and the data will then get written from the template into the database, and it all gets rolled up accordingly. And another option is mobile access. We don't see too many folks that are, say, inputting budget data on their iPhones or Androids or Blackberries, for example. But the idea here is that maybe they need to just pull up a report quickly and see the status of their budget, or be able to look at particular budget values. The idea is that if you have your mobile device, be able to log in and take a look at a report quickly. And so these are some common best practices in terms of what's available out there. And we see organizations that will go completely with one approach, or a combination of all of these approaches in terms of access. Another common challenge is that budget contributors have difficulty preparing purely dollar-based budgets. It's not meaningful, for example. So say, for example, if it might be, if you're preparing a revenue budget, inputting just revenue dollars, looking at last year, and then trying to prepare this year might not be meaningful enough for, say, a budget contributor to go through and input all of that information. So the idea is that we see organizations following this best practice is that wherever possible, try as an organization to understand the underlying drivers of the financials. So once we understand those underlying drivers of the financials, we can help set up, let's say, templates and calculations. So for example, set up a calculation-driven template that will use key unit-based rates. So for example, it could be prices, it could be particular fees that are volume-based. And the idea here is that when the budget contributor is actually preparing, say, the revenue budget, they might be inputting just purely volumetrics. So for example, they might be inputting number of units sold. Maybe on the expense side, if it's working with a particular vendor, it might be a rate times number of hours that we require that vendor. If it's looking at maybe some transactional-based fees, we might look at setting up a template where we're inputting, say, number of transactions, and then it's ultimately going to multiply out by a rate table to come up with those dollar amounts. So maybe for the end users or for the budget contributors, preparing a volumetric-based budget might be more meaningful for them, and we see more organizations moving towards that process. Another common challenge is slow turnaround time for budget revisions, and I think this can drive many organizations crazy. So the idea is that the budget might go through multiple drafts and be able to update. So for example, say we're going through the first draft of the budget, all the budget contributors input their information, then it goes up to maybe a manager level, and the manager reviews it and they want some changes to be made. And then we have to create all these reports and update it and understand what the total budget looks like. And it goes through all these revisions, and it can be a very, very slow process and difficult to manage. So we see that from a best practice perspective, organizations are leveraging these modern budgeting platforms, which allow for the collection and aggregation of the budget data in real time. So as the data is being input, it's automatically aggregated. So if I'm on say, a manager level and I want to review, say, a consolidated report of the budget, as that budget's being input, I can actually see in real time that those totals being updated at a higher level. So for example, at a divisional level, for example, as opposed to looking out into the details of, say, an Excel workbook. So in these budget models, the budget contributors are inputting their data, and then as a manager, I can see already the aggregated results, and I might be able to then reach out to my team to be able to say, okay, we need to make some revisions. It's getting too high here, or it's too low here. We need to make some updates, as opposed to having to wait till the end of the process. So it can make it a little bit more interactive. So we find more organizations are actually managing this process in real time. And having this ability, it's important so we can actually provide timely feedback from the manager level to the budget contributor level, and as I mentioned, to reduce that turnaround time for the revision process. Another challenge that we see organizations face is we know that in our accounting systems, so such as Microsoft Dynamics GP, we're constantly, we could be adding new accounts, for example. And when we're going through the budgeting process and the budget templates are produced, they might not have those accounts set up in our, say, Excel workbook. And so with these modern budgeting platforms, usually what we focus on doing here is that it's integrated with your accounting system, and it actually ensures that there's a routine pull of the chart of accounts to ensure that all accounts are there and available for budgeting, and also with that integration, being able to pull in, say, the trial balances, in some cases transactions, and make sure everything's sort of up to date from a budgeting perspective, so we can do comparatives as well, and also do variance analysis once you get into the reporting aspect. So I think integration is key, and can address a lot of headaches in terms of synchronization between your accounting system and your budgeting process. Another challenge is that, and this is really, I'd say, a big pain point for most organizations, is recreating budget reports and presentations when revisions are made to the data. So say, for example, it goes through that revision process, you spend time preparing all of these reports and presentations, and then there's some revisions that are required, and then you have to go through and recreate all those tables, those charts, those reports, and it's just such a time-consuming process. So the solution here is with an integrated budgeting reporting platform, so such as a CPM platform, it can enable the seamless update of the budget-related reporting and presentations. So the idea is that as data gets updated in the budget model, it automatically flows through to those reports and those charts and those presentations, so you don't have to recreate those all the time. And this is definitely a big headache saver for many organizations. And the last challenge, and I'm sure there's many more, but the idea here is there's a lot of time that's spent on budget administration, and there's limited time that's available left over for analysis. And we hear a lot of our clients saying this, and it's very true across many industries, many organizations, and companies of all different sizes. And so when you work with a robust corporate performance management platform, typically they go beyond just budgeting and reporting. So the platform allows for the automation of the budgeting process and the automation of the reporting. And then since those pieces are somewhat automated and they're structured, we can then leverage other pieces of the platform. So other pieces of the platform can involve, say, data visualization, analytics, dashboarding, scorecarding. And so we can leverage all of that same budgeting information, so key budget targets, our actuals, and be able to report on that from a data visualization perspective, dashboarding perspective, and scorecarding perspective. And this is a huge value add for many organizations. And with these robust CPM platforms, you're able to do, again, with the flexibility of them, being able to drill down into the details. So if we're looking at budgeting, we're able to drill down into the variance analysis to see where particular variances are coming from, and also look at trend-based reporting as well. So this is definitely a huge value add for many organizations. So now, having discussed many challenges and best practices that we see that we're working with organizations to implement, the question is, what is a possible option out there in terms of how we can get there? As I mentioned, a part of it is process. So there are some process changes that can be made to help better improve the budgeting cycle. But also from a technology perspective, there are solutions out there that can help as well. So one of those solutions is Board. It is an all-in-one business intelligence and corporate performance management solution. So this provides a very flexible, robust capabilities of preparing a budgeting and planning and forecasting model, as well as other key pieces that you might require from a CPM platform, such as reporting, financial reporting, management reporting, dashboarding, financial consolidation, and also some other key pieces such as dashboarding, and even strategic management, so such as balanced scorecards and strategy maps. So it has sort of the full piece. And this is an all-in-one solution, so it's not module-based. So the licensing works is you acquire the platform and you can leverage it for all these different uses. So in context of the webinar today, some of the key challenges and best practices. So what Board is able to provide is accessibility. So the idea is that you can access it on your workstation, over the web, through Microsoft Office, or through your mobile device. So the ability and flexibility to submit budgets on time, no matter where you are. From a process perspective, as I mentioned, the key challenge there was budget contributors having an unclear understanding of the budget cycle in terms of requirements and milestones and deadlines. A key piece here is having a workflow overview, so understanding what are the key pieces required, who's responsible, and all the key steps in the budgeting process. So we have an example there of the visual step-by-step flow of the budget cycle in terms of when things are due and what are all of the requirements. Another aspect that we discussed was the difficulty preparing purely dollar-based budgets, so maybe it's not meaningful enough at that level for some folks. They might want to have more detail and maybe looking at the pieces that they control, such as the volumetrics. So with a solution like Board, you can set up driver-based planning. So driver-based planning could be on the revenue side, whether it's prices and cost per units. Could be on the employee side. So if we're looking at budgeting for salaries and benefits, all the key rates and drivers we'd have on that side, and maybe even on the capital side for calculating something like depreciation and amortization. So being able to set up all these drivers, having that ability is a key benefit of implementing a budgeting solution. In addition, in addition to just inputting, say, our financial plan, the platform needs to be able to store text, comments, documents, and attachments. So it goes beyond just the financials. We need to be able to explain our budget values. So being able to input some comments, some documents and attachments definitely provides a lot of value for explaining it and also for the analysis as well. And as far as revisions and also reforecasting, the board platform allows for reforecasting. So the idea is that as actuals come in, being able to prepare a forecast for the remainder of the year. This is definitely key functionality that's out there within these budgeting platforms. And then be able to aggregate that data and view it in your reports. So the idea is that as we're pulling in our chart of accounts, we're preparing our budgets, being able to see what the picture looks like from a high level. And this could be from a financial reporting perspective. So say, for example, we're looking at our P&L. We want to see what our budgeted P&L looks like and maybe what the impact is on the bottom line. And then on the presentation side, be able to prepare all of our presentation materials. And so, for example, here, an example may be an executive or board briefing book. So as opposed to printing out a hard copy report for the team, you can create an interactive flipbook with drill downs and filters. And as the budget data gets input and updated, everything in that report gets updated as well. And this also holds true for Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. And then on the analytics side, being able to prepare, go beyond the budgeting and reporting, be able to prepare reports, KPIs, and charts, and even doing some predictive analytics. So such as a variety of statistical models and clustering to be able to go beyond just budgeting and forecasting to look at statistical trends based on historicals. So with that being said, we're going to move into the actual demonstration, and we're going to look at an example of a budget model and discuss some of those challenges and best practices. So right now I'm in the board application, and this is just a demo model. So the board platform itself is very flexible in terms of layouts, navigation, colors, report design, template design. It's a very, very flexible platform in that sense. So this is just a demonstration. You're not force fit into the structure, but just kind of giving you an idea for the art of the possible. So one piece we were talking about, and the first challenge was that budget contributors are unclear. They don't have a clear understanding of the budget cycle in terms of the requirements and milestones. So we see many organizations implementing, say, like a visual workflow. So for example, what are all of the steps in the budget cycle? So step one might be to prepare the preliminary budget. It might be a further detailed revision. It might go through an approval review process, adjustments are made, and then it goes to the final step in the process. So then as a budget administrator, I can also see where people are in each of those steps and understand maybe if they're not going to reach a particular milestone or deadline. I can reach out to them and say, give them a reminder to say, we're approaching this deadline. You need to make sure that you complete your preliminary budget before this date. So being able to have that kind of visual setup and also make it clear from the get-go to the end users in terms of what's required from them. So this is one visual process of the workflow. And then also you can see in the approval process as well, visually in terms of for a manager, so they can see who's submitted, who's in progress, and you can go through that process to say these are all the folks that report to me, what's their status, and maybe a high-level overview of their budgets. And then, of course, we can set up the email component if you need to set out an alert or reminder to one of those users. So also keeping on this first challenge with the workflow, here's just another example in terms of another setup. So as far as the whole budget process goes in terms of where all the pieces fit in, we see many organizations creating, say, a visual workflow in terms of these are all the pieces that are required, and so they can see how it fits into the big picture. So for example here, I might say that we're going to start off with the revenue planning, then we're going to get into the expense planning, where first it might require the personnel planning piece, so the actual salaries and benefits, which then flows into the operating expenses. And then there might be a separate capital planning process. So here's just another visual layout in terms of all the pieces that might be required. And then this gives a clear visual picture to the organization in terms of what are all the steps that go into actually preparing our overall budget. Another challenge we talked about was the labor-intensive process of actually administering budget workbooks. So with these budgeting platforms, it really puts that whole process into the past in terms of manually creating those Excel workbooks every year and for, say, every department or every division. So in these platforms, they allow you to create your template, and then simply when folks log in, what's great is they're simply based on security. They might only have access to maybe a particular division, and they'll be able to input their expense budgets, their revenue budgets, that specifically relates to their access privileges. So say, for example, if I'm the department head of IT, when I log in, I would only have access to input data against the IT department and all the relevant expenses. Or if I'm in the sales department, I can only access the sales department and only input related revenue and expenses. And so it's just that one template set up once, and then you give the access to the users, and security and filters control the rest. So the next piece then is once we actually produce all the templates, you can create a variety of different templates for capturing revenue and expense-related data. The next challenge is actually preparing like a meaningful budget. So we talked about the example in terms of if it's just looking at purely dollar-based values. As a budget contributor, I might find volumetrics more meaningful than just inputting, say, if I'm looking on the revenue side, dollar revenue. So in this case, we have an example here of where if I'm an end user and I'm a budget contributor, I'm preparing my budget based on volumes, because that's maybe more meaningful to me. So for example here, I might say for this particular channel or for this particular customer, I know I'm going to reach volumes of, let's just say, 800,000 in January. It's going to go up to 850,000 in February, and then I know it's going to taper off around 750,000 for the remainder of the year. I can think in terms of volumes. Maybe that's more meaningful to me as opposed to thinking, okay, well, you know, if I'm going on based on this for this month and trying to come up with the dollars in terms of on the revenue side in terms of how much I'm going to say sell, it might not be as meaningful as thinking in terms of volumes. So this example also relates to on the expense side. So if we're looking at, say, rent, it could be rent by square footage, for example. It might be on the capital side, it might be number of laptops in terms of headcount. So as opposed to trying to come up with a total dollar term, we can actually break down our templates into volumetrics instead of thinking in pure dollar terms. So sticking with this example on the revenue side, if I'm preparing everything based in terms of volumes, in terms of number of units I'm going to sell, what's great is it's going to take these units, even these months, and they might be corresponding a corresponding price table. So here we have the units, we have the total calculated revenue based on a fixed unit price. So as units flow through, it calculates that revenue for me. And the same thing on the cost side, we might have a fixed unit cost. So based on those same volumes, it calculates out the cost for me. And so many organizations are moving towards that approach of going with the driver-based planning approach where they're going based on, say, volumes instead of actually looking at just always purely dollar-based budgets. And for that same rate table, I'll just show you, here's an example of how that rate table was set up. So here we have, for example, all of the different products, what the unit price is, and maybe what the standard cost is, and then it flows through and calculates. So another challenge that we talked about was slow turnaround time for revisions. So with a lot of these platforms, they get into the concept of versioning. So as we're going through those revisions and we're looking at the budgets, it's as simple as the data gets copied over from version 1 to version 2, and this might be, you know, step 2 in the workflow. So draft 1 might be the initial budget that's prepared. by all the budget managers, and then step 2 might be the actual review at the management level where maybe changes need to be made, and then the first version remains intact, everything gets copied over, and then we can simply flow through and make updates to our budgets. And so it makes the actual revision process a lot quicker as opposed to having to recompile all of the data. Everything is copies forward to the next version. Revisions are made, and then we have all of the consolidated reporting and output that's done automatically as opposed to having to manually go through that process in Excel. So that versioning process is definitely a key value add for a lot of organizations when they move to an actual automated budgeting platform. As we're going through this process as well, so say for example here, we're preparing our expense budget. We have our chart of accounts coming through, and we want to make sure that the chart of accounts are in sync. So for example, here we might have different expense accounts for travel, telephone, office supplies, and say a new account's added to our department. A key thing here is to make sure that we have synchronization between our accounting system, so say a Microsoft Dynamics GP, for example, and we want to make sure that the chart of accounts remains in sync. So if new accounts have been added, we want to make sure that they're available for budgeting. So it simply integrates with the Microsoft Dynamics GP database, pulls in the chart of accounts, maybe even trial balances or transactions if required, and it automatically gets updated. It could be on a nightly basis or an on-demand basis, such as what you saw here when I clicked the button. So the integration was complete, chart of accounts and trial balances have been refreshed. So now any new accounts that may have been added will now show up in my budgeting template. So for this department, I might have maybe a postage account was added where it wasn't there before. So this is definitely being able to set up key pieces around your budgeting cycle. Even these simple items such as clear visual workflow, being able to actually set up automated templates, being able to actually set up a volume-based budget as opposed to always using just dollar-based terms, having the integration with your accounting system, being able to prepare different versions of the budgets. These might seem like small things, but they definitely add a lot of value and can actually reduce time that's spent in the overall budgeting process, where you can spend time elsewhere. So part of this is, as we're going through the budgeting process, is being able to see what the output of the actual budget data is. So for example, as we're preparing our budget, we might want to see up-to-date reports. So in this, as we're preparing the budget, we might want to go take a look at the report and see what the financials look like. So as I mentioned, the key challenge here is constantly having to recreate budget reports and presentations when revisions are made. So as we're going through the different revisions of the budget, we don't want to always have to reproduce, say, our divisional expense reports. We don't always have to want to recreate our P&L. We want to make sure that just flows through automatically. So in this example here, if the budget data is being input, we could go to, say, our P&L, for example, and actually look at our budgets as they're being input real time. So in here, we'll be able to scroll across, see what our budgets are in P&L format. So as data is being input into the budget model, everything's flowing through, and it can actually see this from a reporting level as well. And as we're going through that budget cycle where maybe there's presentations being done to management, a presentation done to the board, maybe external stakeholders, we don't always have to recreate these same reports. The data is all there, and it flows through for us automatically. So we're just simply refreshing, and then the data gets updated in the model for us. So having that integrated budgeting and reporting model can provide a lot of value for organizations as opposed to always having to recreate these reports manually, and can create a big headache. And going back to that budget model, we were talking about access, which is definitely a key challenge. So in this, as we're preparing our budget, as you see here, say this budget model can be accessed on my workstation. It could be accessed through a web browser. Maybe I can review the reports on a mobile device. Another key benefit of these applications are that, say, if I want to if I'm, say, for example, going on a flight and I need to update my expense budget and I know I'm not going to have internet access, I could take this template, I could export it to Excel, and what it does is it actually takes the same rows and the same columns, and I'm still in my particular department, and I can actually come in here and update my data. So I'll focus on this top row, for example. So say I'm on the plane, and I want to make some updates here. So I'm going to change this, say, to 20,000, for example. And I'm just going to copy this across for visual purposes. And say I save the workbook, and then once I land and I reconnect to the internet, I can connect securely to my database, which might be on my company network. And then I click Save. And then the next time I actually log into the application, you'll see that the budget data has been written back to the database. And what's nice about this as well is I could actually continue, and I could, when I get, say I'm back in the office on, on Thursday, and I might make some updates to my budget for my department. I might say this is actually 60,000. I'm anticipating this is going to drop down to 5,000, and let's just make this 10,000. I could actually save this, and I could actually go back to that same Excel workbook, and I can open it up and hit refresh, and you'll see that those values have been updated. So it maintains that two-way integration. So this is a very powerful piece of these platforms. You'll have that functionality to provide the offline data collection in addition to being able to access it on your workstation or over the web or through your mobile device. Another piece that we were talking about was the driver-based planning piece. One aspect of it could be we looked at the volumetrics on the revenue side. Another aspect might be the actual personnel planning. So if we're looking at individuals and I'm planning for my particular department, I might see a list of employees that work in my department. They might be on a particular pay grade level. And what I might have control over might be, if we have new hires, what their pay grade should be. So for example, here we have a new hire. They're coming in at pay grade B. And I don't actually have to maybe control like all of the calculations related to salaries and benefits. What's actually awesome is that as a budget contributor, the only thing I need to know is the positions, the people I have. Maybe I might have control over if there is maybe a planned increase, for example, for an individual. There might just be key variables that I input. I don't know. I don't have to control calculating CPP, EI, WSIB, any payroll-related expenses such as pension, for example. You can let the platform do that for you. So make it simple, make it driver-based. So I just pick my people, key attributes, and then the drivers will handle the rest. So what ends up happening is it calculates all of our related expenses. So here are phase salary costs by individual, all of the related benefits, pension, any taxes, overtime or bonuses if it's relevant, and then a summary of all the related employment costs, so salaries, benefits, pension, so all the key pieces. So again, keep it driver-based. Don't make the individuals have to calculate out benefits themselves, set up all the rates, and have that flow through just based on key assumptions. And the other aspect is on the capital side. So as you go through, if you're planning for particular purchases, so for example, in my department, I might be planning to acquire some particular items. The only thing I need to know is the item, what it costs, and then maybe an asset type that it belongs to and the date of purchase, and the rest flows through on its own. So if we go back to here, so after I plan for my department based on all the depreciation rates, I don't need to know how to calculate depreciation. I'll let the model do that for me. So based on the items that I purchased, it flows through and it actually calculates out the planned capital cash outflow based on those purchases and the actual depreciation based on the relevant depreciation schedules. So all of that's interconnected for us. So that addresses some of the key challenges that we're facing and some of the best practices in terms of model setup, visual workflow, being able to set up calculations and being able to set up all the driver-based planning, user access, all these key pieces that are critical to setting up a smooth flowing budget model and getting out of that the Excel workbook, the very manual process approach that many organizations are facing. And now, after we go through that process of having a lot of this process, the budget model automated, is we want to spend more time, as I mentioned, on the actual analysis, the analytics aspect of say, the finance function. And so one key aspect is looking at some analysis. So with these robust CPM platforms, as I mentioned, they go beyond just planning and reporting. They also allow for data visualization, dashboarding, scorecards, detailed drill down into the actual variance. So you can set up dashboards based on your budgets and actuals. You can look at key indicators, key trends. So for example, in that earlier example where I was preparing, say, my sales budget, here I can see at a high level what I had budgeted for, what the actuals are. So now I can actually spend some time on some analytics. And I might say, okay, well, this is what we were budgeting for. I want to see a breakdown for maybe a particular area. So I might want to say, these departments, I want to see what the budgets versus actuals look like. And then here you'll see the breakdown, what the trends look like. I could take it a step further and say, I want to drill down into the details. So you can actually drill down and say, I want to see this data by, as I mentioned, channel, for example. And here we'd have a breakdown of by channel. We can see what the actuals were, what we had budgeted for, what's the variance, what's the difference compared to the prior year. I could sort this and say, okay, I want to look at this, my highest selling area. I want to drill down into the details. And you know what? I want to see a breakdown of what regions I'm actually selling these products into and what I had budgeted for. So here you get the breakdown. We see here's our highest selling region. We had budgeted for only 75. We're actually up to 99. That's awesome. And here we actually have a new region we're selling into for these products, which we didn't budget for, which partially explains some of the variance. And I could continue to drill down and say, in this region, which particular customers are we selling to? And say, for example, here, we had planned to sell for these customers. This is what we actually sold to these customers. And so you have the breakdown of the customer, the actuals, the budget, and even drill down into the actual product level. And it's just as long as you prepare that detailed budget, you can get a very detailed analysis in terms of where those variances are coming from, which can provide a lot of value to organizations in terms of decision-making and planning. And again, you can get different visuals of this with the budgets and actuals. You can be looking at targets, for example, here. And it's just all different layouts and visual setups that you can apply and layer over top of your budget model from a reporting perspective. So cost variance, for example, percent of budget completed, and have a very visual view for the organization in terms of actually monitoring performance. And the last piece that I'll show here in terms of the analytics is normally this is, let's say, a really advanced step that organizations take is to then go into the predictive analytics aspect. And here's looking at, say we're looking at our budgets, but then we want to actually look at maybe a scenario where we're doing some forecasts based on historical trends. And we see some organizations really getting into the next level where they're looking at actual statistical models, they're looking at forecast horizons, and the board platform allows for that. So you can compare multiple versions. So this is what we had, say, what we budgeted for based on a statistical trend. This is maybe what could potentially happen based on historicals. And it provides a sort of ability to look at, whether is our budget sensible based on historicals, and allows us to better at least anticipate what may happen in the future. And so you can leverage these tools to provide more analytics and actually more insight in terms of what may happen in addition to just the planning process. So that brings us to the end here. So again, just as a quick recap, we discussed some of the key challenges. As I mentioned, we were looking at the particular challenges that are faced in the budgeting planning process. One was users not having a clear understanding of the budget cycle. The key is to incorporate a communication plan, set up the visual, transparent workflow with milestones so they understand what belongs to them, what are the steps in the budget cycle, getting away from the Excel workbooks and producing these each year, and actually setting up structured templates that simply get refreshed at the beginning of each budget cycle, and even the reforecasting process. We don't always have to recreate those Excel workbooks. The other challenge was access. So the idea is that with these new applications, be able to access it on their workstation, over the web, through Microsoft Office integration, through your mobile device. The other challenge was having difficulty preparing purely dollar-based budgets, make it more meaningful, see where you can actually do some calculation-driven templates, using volumetrics instead of always using just purely dollar-based budgets. So the idea of using, say, transactions, number of hours, number of deliverables, unit sales, for example. Slow turnaround time for budget revisions. Again, the best practice here was with these budget models, everything gets actively, as you're inputting the budget data, you can actually see the reports real time. So if you need to make revisions, you can reach out to the team, and as opposed to having to wait for all the budget collection to be done and see the report afterwards, you can actually do this process real time and make those revisions. Having the integration with your accounting system. So with Microsoft Dynamics GP, so the idea of pulling in the chart of accounts to make sure that all the accounts are there for budgeting purposes, and be able to do all of the variance analysis with all the trial balances and transactions. The other challenge was recreating budget reports and presentations every time revisions are made. So with these platforms, everything's integrated from budgeting to reporting. So as updates are made, all the reports and presentations can get refreshed just with a click of a button, as opposed to having to reproduce all those reports. And finally, so much time spent on budget administration, there's no time for analysis. And so be able to have an application that can go beyond budgeting and reporting to provide all the data visualization, the dashboarding, scorecards, the analysis, drill down into variance, all that information that's critical as an organization. All right, so that brings us to the end here. So as I mentioned, if there are any questions, please feel free to input into the question box, and I'll gladly answer them. Okay, we have a good question here. It's can we import data that's not financial, such as transactions or unit sales? So yes, absolutely, if you have that information, for sure. So some data that we see folks might be importing for variance analysis could be coming from, the subledger, for example. So if you want to be looking at the sales subledger and pulling in unit sales, that could definitely be a key point for some analysis, for sure. And we actually see organizations even going beyond their financial platform. So with a product like Board, is that you can tap into other systems. You're not limited to, say, purely just pulling in data from Dynamics GP. If you have other databases, other systems that you might want to pull in information for budgeting or reporting purposes, Board could tap into those potentially and actually pull in the information as well. And then you get one consolidated view of everything. Okay, here's a question. Is Board multi-currency? Yes, it is. So we have organizations that actually use many currencies. So they might budget and report on various currencies. So whether it's Canadian dollars, US dollars, euros, whatever currency they're working in, you can actually set up currency dimension so that you can budget in all these different currencies, report on these different currencies, and actually looking at the variance at an FX impact, a foreign exchange impact perspective. Okay, here's another question. We saw that Board integrates with Excel. Does it also integrate with other Office applications? Yes, so Board does integrate with Excel, as you mentioned, and it also does integrate with Word and PowerPoint. So you can actually reference and pull in tables of data or charts into Word and PowerPoint from Board. So if you have quarterly reports or anything that you produce or presentations in Word or PowerPoint, you can be referencing Board data, and if things change, you can simply hit refresh directly in Word or PowerPoint, and then the data will get refreshed in those tables and charts as well. All right, looks like that is it. No more questions. So Please feel free to reach out if you want to talk something offline, or if you want more details with regards to the best practices or anything related to our budgeting and planning or corporate performance management solutions. Yeah, please feel free to reach out to me. My email and number are on the screen right now. So yeah, please feel free to reach out. I hope this was an informative session, and I'm glad the folks attended today. So thank you very much for your time, and hope to talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.